Welcome back. I got another video here. A man disappeared in Appalachian Mountain under Mrs. Circumstance. Tracks suggest a griffin or some kind of mystical creature because it shows him tracks them running and all of a sudden they're going straight up in the air. So let's get ahead in the video. This has happened 6 hours ago. So enjoy.
Between the known and the impossible becomes so thin that any rational thought crashes against a wall of the inexplicable. In October 2002, an event occurred in Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee that still has no logical explanation. 38-year-old engineer Nathan Elger, an experienced hiker with 10 years of mountain climbing experience, disappeared in the middle of the night from his sealed tent, leaving no signs of a struggle or escape. The only clues were drops of unidentified biological fluid near a tree, a headlamp 100 feet from the camp, and something completely unbelievable: fragments of claws with a chitinous layer stuck in branches 9 feet above the ground, claws that do not belong to any species known to science in this region. Local hunters whispered about a shadow with huge wings sweeping over the trees that night, about a sound like the flapping of giant wings. The National Park Service found a 7-foot diameter nest a week before the disappearance, but decided not to attach any significance to it. And Nathan Elger never came out of the forest. What took him that night? Write in the comments whether you believe in the existence of large, unknown predators in the Appalachian Mountains, and whether it is worth continuing to investigate such anomalous disappearances. Great Smoky Mountains National Park straddles the border between Tennessee and North Carolina, covering more than 200,000 hectares of wild mountain terrain. This is one of the oldest mountain ranges on the planet. The Appalachians were formed about 480 million years ago, long before the Rocky Mountains or the Alps appeared. Ancient forests cover the slopes like a dense carpet: oaks, maples, hickories, and poison hemlocks, some of which are over 300 years old. Fog rolls through the valleys almost daily, creating the smoky effect that gave the mountains their name. The peaks reach 2,000 meters in height, and the slopes are cut by deep gorges and hidden valleys, where sunlight penetrates for only a few hours a day. Even an experienced hiker can easily get lost in these mountains. Compasses are unreliable due to iron ore deposits that distort the magnetic field. Trails are often washed away by rain or blocked by landslides, and there is no mobile phone coverage in most areas. Millions of tourists visit the park every year, but the vast majority stay on the well-maintained routes along the main trails. Those who venture deeper into the remote areas risk encountering wildlife in its pristine, sometimes brutal form. Nathan Elger was born and raised in the suburbs of Nashville, the capital of Tennessee, in a family of a school teacher and a nurse. From childhood, he showed an interest in nature and technology, collecting insects for his collection and taking apart old radios to understand how they worked. After school, he enrolled in the University of Tennessee's Mechanical Engineering Department, received his bachelor's degree in 1997, and then took a job as a design engineer at a company that manufactured industrial equipment for the food industry. The job was stable and well paid, but monotonous: drawings, calculations, meetings, reports. Nathan compensated for the monotony of office life with regular trips to the mountains. He started with short one-day routes and gradually moved on to multi-day expeditions with overnight stays in a tent. Over 10 years of hiking, he covered most of the Appalachian Trail, from Georgia to Virginia, always walking alone, preferring solitude to group communication. Friends and colleagues described him as a calm, methodical person who carefully planned each trip, studied maps, checked the weather, and carried an excess supply of food and water. He never took reckless risks, never deviated from his planned route without good reason, and always returned on time. In 10 years of active tourism, There had not been a single incident or request for help. On Saturday, October 5th, 2002, Nathan loaded his red Ford Ranger pickup truck with camping gear, a 3-season Ray tent, a sleeping bag rated for temperatures down to -10 degrees, a backpack with food for 4 days, a gas burner, spare gas canisters, a first aid kit, a knife, a compass, paper maps of the region, a headlamp with spare batteries, a thermos, and a water filter. He told his sister Elizabeth, with whom he had a close relationship, that he was planning a 2-day hike on the Mount LeConte Trail, one of the park's most scenic routes, leading to the nearly 2,000-meter-high LeConte Peak. The plan was simple. Enter the park on the morning of October 6th, walk about 8 miles to the middle of the route, set up camp, spend the night, climb to the summit the next day, and return to the car by the evening of October 8th. He promised to call his sister on the evening of the 8th when he returned to the communication zone. Elizabeth wasn't worried. Her brother went on hikes like this regularly, always returned on time, and always kept his word. On Sunday morning, October 6th, Nathan arrived at the park headquarters around 8 a.m., registered his route with the ranger on duty, left his car number and estimated return date, the evening of October 8th. The ranger, a young man of about 25 named Kyle Morgan, later recalled that Nathan looked perfectly normal, even in a good mood, joking that he had finally escaped from the office to get some fresh air. The weather that day was cool, but clear. The temperature was around 15 degrees. There was a light breeze, and the forecast promised stable conditions for the next 3 days, with no rain or sudden cold snaps. Perfect conditions for a hike. Nathan parked his pickup truck in the official parking lot at the trailhead, checked his backpack one last time, and headed into the woods around 9 in the morning. This was the last documented sighting of Nathan Elger alive. October 8th, Tuesday, passed without a call from her brother. Elizabeth began to worry around 10 p.m. when all reasonable explanations for the delay had been exhausted. She called the park ranger station and reported that her brother was supposed to return that afternoon, but was not in contact. The ranger on duty checked the registration records and confirmed that Nathan Elger had indeed registered for a 2-day trip with a return date of the 8th. The car was still in the parking lot, untouched. This turned the situation from a simple delay into an official incident. According to park protocol, if a registered hiker does not return by the specified time and cannot be reached, a search and rescue operation is initiated. By midnight, search teams were involved. On Wednesday, October 9th, at dawn, 3 search teams arrived at the park, a total of 24 people, including park rangers, volunteers from the local mountain rescue team, and 2 dog handlers with service dogs. They began combing the official Mount LeConte Trail, moving from the trailhead deeper into the park, checking every turn, every fork, every place where a hiker could have strayed from the path or been injured. The trail was relatively easy, well marked, but in some places ran along cliffs and steep slopes, where a careless step could lead to a fall. The teams looked for signs of an accident, broken rocks, broken branches, skid marks, but found nothing. By lunchtime, they had covered more than half the route without success. The dogs picked up a faint scent around the 3rd mile of the trail, but lost it almost immediately. The scent veered away from the main route, toward a section of forest that had recently been partially closed due to a landslide that had collapsed part of the slope in late September. The search operation leader, Ranger Captain David Holloway, a 53-year-old man with 30 years of experience working in national parks, decided to send 2 teams into the closed area, despite the potential danger of further landslides. If Nathan had turned off there, perhaps trying to bypass an obstacle or exploring an interesting route, he could have been trapped or injured. The teams moved cautiously, securing themselves with ropes in dangerous areas. After about 3 hours of searching, at around 4 p.m., one of the teams discovered the camp. The tent stood on a small flat area in a dense forest, about 3 miles and 800 yards from the main trail, at the foot of a steep slope, covered with century-old trees. The place was difficult to access, hidden from casual observers by dense vegetation. The first thing that struck the rescuers was that the tent was completely intact and zipped up. The group leader, a ranger named Marcus Riley, carefully unzipped the tent and looked inside. The tent was empty. The sleeping bag was neatly laid out, as if ready for use but unused, not wrinkled, the zipper closed. In the corner stood a backpack, partially unpacked. On top was a gas burner, next to it a small pot, a package of instant noodles. A thermos of water stood at the entrance, half full, the lid screwed on. The headlamp was missing, although according to the description of Nathan's equipment from his sister, he always took a headlamp with him for traveling in the dark. The food in the backpack was untouched: 5 packets of noodles, 3 energy bars, 2 apples, a bag of nuts, everything in place. The first aid kit was sealed, and the knife in its sheath lay next to the backpack. The compass and maps are neatly folded in the side pocket of the backpack. It looked as if Nathan had just set up camp, prepared for the night, but left for a short time, perhaps to relieve himself or to fetch water, and simply did not return. The team immediately began combing the area around the camp in widening circles, looking for tracks, signs of the direction Nathan might have gone. About 110 feet from the tent, toward the slope, one of the volunteers found a headlamp, partially covered with fallen leaves. The flashlight was turned on, but the batteries were dead. The bulb was not lit. There were several scratches on the body, as if the flashlight had fallen or hit something hard. This spot was at the edge of a small clearing between the trees, where the ground sloped down to a stream about 30 meters below. There were no footprints around the lantern. A layer of fallen leaves, several inches thick, made it impossible to distinguish any prints. The dogs tried to pick up the trail from the lantern, but to no avail. The scent disappeared literally a meter from the site of the find, as if the man had simply vanished into thin air. After another 20 minutes of searching, another member of the team, an experienced tracker named Jerome Clark, discovered something strange at the base of a massive oak tree about 50 feet from where the lantern had been found. On the bark of the tree, about 4 feet above the ground, there were dark splashes of liquid, already dried, but still visible. The liquid was reddish-brown in color, viscous in consistency, and left traces of dripping down the bark. Jerome immediately called Captain Holloway and suggested that it was blood. Holloway examined the marks, agreed that it looked like biological fluid, ordered the site to be secured, and samples to be taken for analysis. One of the rangers carefully scraped some of the liquid into a sterile test tube, which search teams always carry for such situations. But the strangest find awaited the team when they began to examine the upper branches of the trees around the spot with the splashes of liquid. Jerome Clark, who had a habit of always looking not only at his feet, but also upward, a skill acquired through years of hunting and tracking, noticed something unusual about 9 feet up on 2 adjacent branches of an oak tree. He asked for a rope and carabiners, climbed up the tree trunk using the knots as support. Stuck on 2 branches about a foot apart were fragments of something hard and curved, each about 2 to 3 inches long. Jerome carefully removed the fragments and climbed down to examine his find in daylight. The fragments looked like claw fragments, but not ordinary ones. They had a strange structure. The outer layer was translucent, yellowish-gray, hard, similar to the keratin of bird claws. But when Jerome tried to bend one of the fragments slightly, he discovered that under the outer layer there was another, darker and denser, with a characteristic layered structure. He showed his find to Captain Holloway, who had served in the park for more than 20 years and had seen the remains of all the local predators: bears, cougars, lynxes, eagles, hawks, and owls. Holloway carefully examined the fragments and honestly admitted that he could not determine what animal they belonged to. Too large for any known birds in the region, too strange in structure for mammals. He ordered the fragments to be packed in a separate container for further examination and continued the search. By nightfall on October 9th, the teams had found no additional traces of Nathan Elger. They searched the area within a half-mile radius of the camp, checked the stream at the bottom of the slope for a body in the water, and combed the surrounding ravines and caves, of which there are many in this region. Nothing. No signs of a struggle, no torn clothing, no signs of an animal attack. Bears in October are preparing for hibernation, feeding actively, but usually avoiding humans, especially in tents, unless attracted by the smell of food. At Nathan's camp, the food was sealed in airtight containers, unopened, with no signs that a bear had tried to get to the supplies. Cougars sometimes attack people, but extremely rarely, and always leave traces: scratches, blood, torn clothing, drag marks. There was nothing like that here. The search continued for another 4 days. A helicopter with a thermal imager was brought in to fly over the area within a 5-mile radius of the camp, scanning the ground for the heat signature of a living person or a recently deceased body. Nothing. Teams combed the forest at 10-meter intervals, checking every ravine, every crevice in the rocks, every fallen tree under which an injured or dead person might be found. By October 13th, more than 50 people were involved in the search, including volunteers from neighboring towns and cavers who checked caves within a 10-mile radius. Elizabeth came to the park and begged them to continue the search, but Captain Holloway was forced to explain the reality. After a week without water or food in the autumn mountains, the chances of finding a person alive were practically zero. If Nathan was injured and unable to move, he was already dead from hypothermia or dehydration. If he was lost and wandering through the woods, the dogs would have picked up his scent long ago. If he had fallen into a ravine or cave, the helicopter would have detected a heat signal while his body was still warm. None of this had happened. Nathan Elger had seemingly vanished into thin air. By October 15th, the active search was officially suspended. The case was transferred to the category of cold cases, where it remains open, but without active investigation unless new leads emerge. Nathan's car was removed from the parking lot and given to his sister. The items from the tent were packed up and also returned to the family. The camp was dismantled, but the area was left untouched in case new evidence emerged. Samples of biological fluid and claw fragments were sent to the Tennessee State Forensic Laboratory for analysis. The results of the examination arrived 3 weeks later and only deepened the mystery. The biological fluid from the tree bark did indeed contain traces of blood, but the DNA was so degraded and fragmented that it was impossible to determine its source. The genetic expert who conducted the analysis, Dr. Susan Reynolds, wrote in her report that the degree of DNA degradation was not consistent with the normal process of decomposition over several days in the open air. Normally, blood left in the open air remains suitable for DNA analysis for at least several weeks, especially in cool weather. This blood looked as if it had been exposed to extreme conditions, high temperatures, or strong chemical exposure, although there was nothing of the sort at the site where it was found. Partial sequencing showed that the DNA did not match any human or known mammal in the region. Some fragments of the genome resembled bird sequences, but with anomalies that did not fit any known species. Dr. Reynolds recommended reanalysis using more sensitive equipment, but the sample was too small for additional testing. Analysis of the claw fragments yielded even stranger results. Material science testing conducted at the University of Tennessee showed that the outer layer was indeed composed of keratin, the main protein that forms claws, feathers, and hair in animals. The structure of the keratin was similar to that of birds, with a characteristic arrangement of protein fibers. But beneath this layer, a second denser layer was discovered, consisting of chitin, a polysaccharide that forms the exoskeletons of insects and the shells of crustaceans, but is not found in vertebrates, including birds. This combination, a keratin outer layer with a chitin substrate, does not exist in any species known to science. Expert zoology professor Michael Weinstein wrote in his conclusion that it was either a man-made artifact or the remains of a creature not recorded in scientific literature. He rejected the artifact theory because the structure was too organic, with signs of growth and microcirculation, characteristic of living tissue. The National Park Service decided not to publish these findings widely, fearing panic and an influx of thrill seekers. The official version presented to the family and the press is that Nathan Elger disappeared under unexplained circumstances, probably got lost, and died of hypothermia, or fell into a crevice inaccessible to searchers. The evidence found at the camp does not provide a clear answer as to the reasons for his disappearance. The investigation is ongoing, but the active search has been suspended until new leads emerge. However, information has begun to leak through unofficial channels. One of the search team volunteers, a local resident named Joel Kraus, a hunter with 40 years of experience who participated in the search and witnessed the discovery of the claws, began to share details with friends and acquaintances. Kraus said that the day before the official search, on the night of October 8th, he was hunting deer in the woods, about 2 miles from where Nathan's camp was later found. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, he heard a strange sound which he described as a flash of noise, as if someone had suddenly turned a huge parachute, followed immediately by a loud bang, like the beat of giant wings in the air. The sound repeated 3 times at intervals of a few seconds, then silence. Kraus claimed that the sound came from somewhere above, from the level of the treetops, or higher. He looked up, but saw nothing in the darkness, only a slight movement of the branches, as if something large had flown over the forest. He didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was a large owl, although the sound was too loud even for a great horned owl, the largest nocturnal predator in the region. When he participated in the search a few days later and saw the claw fragments found on the tree, Kraus remembered that night and began to piece together the details. He shared his suspicions with Captain Holloway, but the captain politely but firmly asked him not to spread speculation and to stick to the facts. Kraus disobeyed and began telling his version of events in local bars and shops. His story caught the attention of a local journalist from a small newspaper who published an article titled, "Hunter Claims to Have Heard Giant Bird on Night of Tourist's Disappearance." The article generated interest, but most readers dismissed it as sensationalism without evidence. Another source of information was an anonymous National Park Service employee who, in a private conversation with several paranormal investigators, revealed details that had never been officially published. According to him, a week before Nathan Elger's disappearance, at the end of September, rangers discovered a strange nest in the same area of the forest where the camp was later found. The structure was located on a hillside, partially hidden under a rock ledge, and consisted of a platform of thick branches, each 2 to 3 inches in diameter, woven into a rough circular structure about 7 feet in diameter. In the center of the nest lay a layer of smaller branches, moss and feathers, large gray-brown feathers, up to 14 inches long, that did not match any known species of bird in the region. The largest birds in the Appalachians, golden eagles and turkey vultures, have a wingspan of up to 2.5 meters, but their feathers are much smaller and have a different structure. The rangers photographed the nest, took samples of feathers and branches, and sent them to the park's biology department for identification. The park's biologist, a young woman named Jennifer Lowe, examined the samples and concluded that the feathers were indeed avian in structure, but did not match any known species. The size and shape indicated a very large predator, presumably with a wingspan of 3 to 4 meters, which is larger than any recorded bird in North America. The largest North American bird, the California condor, has a wingspan of up to 3 meters, but their range is limited to the West Coast, and they are not found in the Appalachians. Jennifer recommended conducting a more detailed analysis and possibly installing surveillance cameras in the nest area. However, park management decided not to give the discovery any significance, officially attributing the nest to the activity of a large owl, even though the size clearly did not match. No cameras were installed, the nest was left untouched, and the area was not cordoned off. After Nathan's disappearance, some rangers tried to return to the site of the nest, but found that the structure had been destroyed. The branches were scattered, the feathers were gone, and only a round patch of trampled earth and moss remained. It looked as if the nest had been deliberately dismantled, rather than destroyed by weather or animals. This information was also not included in the official reports, but an employee who wished to remain anonymous shared the details with researchers who began to collect alternative versions of the disappearance. One of the most discussed, though not officially recognized versions, was the hypothesis of a large, unknown predator, possibly a bird, or a creature with bird-like characteristics, inhabiting remote areas of the Appalachians. Cryptozoology enthusiasts who study unconfirmed animal species pointed to numerous historical accounts of giant bird sightings in the region. The Cherokee Indians, the indigenous people of these mountains before the arrival of Europeans, had legends about Tlanusi, a huge predatory bird with copper talons that kidnapped hunters and carried them to its nest on the tops of inaccessible cliffs. The legend described a creature the size of a moose, with wings that eclipsed the sun, and a cry like thunder. The first European settlers also left records of encounters with strange, large birds. The diaries of 18th century colonists contain references to creatures with eagle heads and bodies the size of bears flying over the valleys at sunset. Skeptics dismissed these accounts as mythology and exaggeration, explaining the sightings as misidentifications of known large birds, turkeys, eagles, magnified in the imagination of frightened witnesses. Indeed, in conditions of poor visibility, at dawn or dusk, a large bird against the sky may appear larger than it actually is. However, some modern accounts are more difficult to explain. Since the 1990s, more than 50 reports of encounters with giant birds in the Appalachians, mainly in the Great Smoky Mountains, Shenandoah, and George Washington Forest National Parks, have been added to the database of unusual sightings. Witnesses describe creatures with a wingspan of 3 to 5 meters, dark or gray-brown plumage, disproportionately large claws, silently gliding above the forest at the height of the treetops. One of the most documented sightings occurred in July 2001, a little over a year before Nathan Elger's disappearance. A group of 4 tourists, including a professional photographer, observed a large bird over a valley in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, about 10 miles from where Nathan's camp was later found. The photographer managed to take 3 pictures of the creature at the maximum zoom of his camera. The photos are of poor quality due to the distance and shaky hands, but they show a large bird with outstretched wings flying against the backdrop of a mountain range. Bird experts who studied the photos were divided in their opinions. Some claim that it is a turkey vulture, photographed from an unfortunate angle that creates the illusion of a larger size, while others point to anatomical details that do not correspond to any known species, especially the shape of the claws and the proportions of the wings to the body, could such a creature be real? The scientific consensus says no. Biologists point to the physical limitations of flight for creatures of great mass. The largest known flying birds of the past, such as Argentavis magnificens, which lived 6 million years ago, had a wingspan of up to 7 meters and a mass of about 70 kilograms. But they existed in